Hello, we are back with another video. Today I want to dive a little bit deeper into Excel macros, and I want to show you guys one of the most powerful things about using macros is the being able to use variables. It's a very important thing to learn how to do. To really take your Excel macro skills to the next level once you start learning how to use the variables. So let's pick up where we left off last time. We'll use the same sales file, and if you remember last time, what we did was we just created a quick macro to copy and paste this over here. We just made a button for it, and that was it. Pretty simple. So let's get a little bit more advanced, and what we want to do is instead of copying this report over here, we want to move it to another workbook. Let's just say that we're going to create a new workbook, and this workbook can be our report that we're going to create. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go into developer. Let's go back into our module here. Okay, so a couple things with when using variables. Now the very first part of using a variable is you need to declare what type of variable it's going to be. If it's going to be a number, an object, you need to, well, you don't have to, but it's good practice to declare to Excel what type of variable you're going to use. So we're going to start by saying dim my number as long, and this just means that my number is going to be a number. Now these parts in here in blue are like, they're basically functions inside of Excel. These are predetermined things here, whereas my number is a variable that I created. You could really name this anything, but basically what this is going to do is anytime I use my number inside the code, it's going to replace whatever I want this to be. So in this step, I'm just declaring, I'm saying my number is a number. Now I need to tell Excel what number is it. So I'm going to say my number equals 2. Now let me just show you a quick little trick here. As you're going through, I'm going to hit F8 and step through here. Now as you scroll through here, if you hover over my number, you can see that it equals 2. Where before, if I hover over it, it says 0 because I haven't reached that point yet. Once I get past here, it's 2. So that'll come in handy later once you're trying to figure out exactly when you're trying to debug maybe some errors that you're getting. You might want to come back and see what it's actually set to, what your variable is set to, but we'll get into more detail in a minute here. So there's also a cool other couple cool things you can do in here. My number doesn't have to necessarily be a number itself. It could be an equation like 2 plus 1. And if I were to come and step through here, my number is 3. See? So let's kind of put this to use here. What I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna write a quick little line here, and I'll just say range A1 dot value equals my number. So now let's run through this and see what it does. I get to here, you see my number is 3. Now once I step through this, you can see what it did. If I picked the range A1, I said the value equals my number, which is 3. Okay? So that was pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Let me just change this back to what it was. Okay. Okay. So that's a pretty basic introduction to using variables, declaring them, setting it, and using it in your code. So let's move on to showing you guys how to work in between a couple workbooks. Let me just show you guys something really quick. So with this line here, when you say range dot value, Excel is going to automatically assume that you want to perform this right on whatever sheet you have. Basically this sheet right here, whichever one is open and like the most active sheet is where it's going to assume that you want to do this. So it's better practice to be a little bit more specific when you're writing a line like this. Normally what you would do is you can say active workbook, and then you would say dot active sheet, and then you would say range. So you're basically telling it here which workbook you're working in, which sheet you're working in that workbook, which range you're working in that sheet, and what you want to do to it. Okay? Now we're going to use our knowledge of setting variables to kind of manipulate this a little bit. So the first thing we want to do, we can leave this, we'll just put this up here somewhere. Okay, so what I want to do is dim, and we'll say old report as workbook. Okay, so what I'm telling Excel is this variable I just created called old report, I'm saying that this variable is a workbook. Okay, and I'm going to set old report equal to active workbook. Now normally when you're setting a variable, you could do it the way that you do it up here, with just putting whatever the variable name is equals to whatever you want it to equal. The reason we're putting set here is because this is an object. We're using a workbook as an object. So when you're setting an object as a variable, you need to put this set and then put the variable name equals to whatever you want it to equal. Now what we can do here is, since we've made old report, the variable of old report equal active workbook, we can come down here and replace active workbook with old report. Okay, now this is going to help us in the future when we're creating more lines down here and we want to be more specific about which workbook we're working in. We're going to use this variable here to tell it that we want to use this worksheet, our original workbook, when we put this here. Okay, now let's I want to switch it up a little bit here, because what I want to do is I want to include the worksheet name inside of the variable as well. So here we have active worksheet, but I want to be more specific and tell it exactly which sheet I'm working in. Now let's say, let's just say for example we have a couple more sheets here. Okay, we got all these sheets over here. So what I'm going to do is, let's change this to, instead of workbook, I want this variable to be a worksheet. Okay, and I'm going to set old report to active workbook because I want to tell it what workbook I'm working in. But inside of this workbook, I guess what I could do is I could use worksheet, active worksheet if I wanted to. And that would give me, that would make this variable equal to whatever sheet I'm working in. But I want to be more specific, right? So another way you can do this is you can say sheets, open parentheses, and say type in the name of the sheet in quotes. Okay, and you could also another way you could do this is you could say sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, which would actually be the sheet, the number of the sheet, not the name. So if you put it in quotes, then you're gonna use the name of the sheet. Okay, and what I'm gonna just do is delete this. Okay, so anytime I put old report, what I'm basically putting is this right here. So I'm telling it the workbook that I'm working in, and I'm telling it the sheet that I'm working in inside of that workbook. But I'm just using this basically as a shortcut. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is let's create our new workbook. So I'm going to say dim new report as worksheet. And then I'm going to say set new report equal to workbooks dot add. Okay, so this function here, workbooks dot add, is a function inside of Excel, and this right here by itself would just open a new worksheet, new workbook. So if I were to leave this by itself, I would actually have to change this up here to workbook, because this object by itself is a workbook. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to worksheet, change it back to worksheet, and then over here I'm going to tell it which sheet, to be more specific. Now I'm just going to name it sheet 1 because that's the standard default name. When you open a new workbook, it's going to be sheet 1. I could just say 1 also, but we'll do it like this. Okay, so now I have my 2 reports here, 2 workbooks specified with the sheet name. And now if you see what I can do, I could even copy this. Oh, that was not copy. I can copy this and paste it here, and then I can just change this to new report. And then what this would do is it would put my number in the old report, and it's also going to put it in the new one. So let's just run this and see what happens here. Let me go ahead and save it really quick, just in case something goes wrong. Actually, I just want to do a couple things here really quick before I run this. I want to comment out these down here because I don't want these to run yet. I'm going to save that for just a minute here. And something I probably should have done at the beginning, I'm going to put application dot screen updating equals false. And what this will do is it's basically just going to give me the end result. So when you run a macro, normally if you don't have this line, you will see Excel doing each individual process on your screen. So this kind of eliminates that, and it kind of makes it run in the background. So just makes your macro run a little bit smoother. You just get the end result when you push run. So let me just reset this, save it, and I'm gonna run it, and let's see what happens. Alright, there we go. We got a new workbook, just like we asked it to. So we declared the old workbook, we named it with a sheet, we made our new workbook with the sheet, and then what we did down here was we stated which workbook and sheet we were working in up here. We told it the range, and we told it the value to be my number, which we already set up here. And then I did with the new workbook, I set it the range, I told it, and I want the value to be my number as well. And it did both of that here. I didn't even have to open or close any other workbooks. I didn't have to switch between any of them. I just told it which workbook I was working in and what I wanted the value to be. And that's pretty simple. Not too many lines of code here, but a pretty simple task. So let's finish up here with what we originally wanted to do. We wanted to copy this report into our new report. Okay, so let's just go ahead and delete this. We don't want this to happen. In fact, we don't even need any of this up here anymore. Let's just clean this up a little bit. Okay. Now let's take the comments off of here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretty much use the same template that we originally started with, but I'm going to tell it which workbook I want to copy, well, select and copy. So I'm going to select this range from the old report, and then this selection will be copied. Okay, and then the range G1, now I need to specify which workbook I want this range to be selected in, right? So I'm going to say new report dot range. Now when we're doing it this way, because we're switching through workbooks, before you can select a cell inside of a workbook, you have to make sure it's active. So what you have to do is old report dot activate, and that way you can select this range in this workbook. We didn't have to do this before because we were only working in that active workbook, but now that we have different workbooks, we have to make sure that the correct one is activated. So after I copy this, I want to come down here and I want to make sure we activate the new report before we select it. Activate. Okay. So once we activate it, we can select it, and the active sheet will paste. So let's reset this. Let's save it, and let's just run it and see what happens. Alright, there we go. Pretty simple, right? It opened up a new workbook. Copied the range that we asked it to from the old report, and it pasted it into the new one where we told it to at G1. And that's pretty much all I wanted to show you guys. The last thing I'm going to show you is just kind of how to do this a little bit simpler. As I was explaining to you guys, there's always ways to make it a little bit more efficient and easier. When you're doing, like I told you guys before, when you're doing the recording especially, Excel will sometimes take a more complicated approach, a more step-by-step, when there's a lot of shortcuts you can take. So this is kind of the long way for beginners. This is a good way to see everything step by step. But once you start learning some shortcuts, I'll just show you guys something really quick here. What you can do is, I want to say old report, and I want to specify the range, which is A1 through E25. And with this range, I'm going to copy. Okay, and then in the same line, I can just put space, and I can put new report dot range, and we'll just put it at A1 this time. And that's the destination for the copy. So we just did that whole thing in one line here. Let's just go ahead and reset this, save it, and we'll just run it. And there you go. You can see in one line we moved this report from one workbook to another. Pretty cool, huh? So there's a lot more we can do with Excel. In future videos, I'm going to try to show you guys a lot more stuff. So hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know if you have any questions or any special requests, and thanks for watching.